These Cheddar-Onion Biscuits are so moist and flaky, you'll never buy store-bought biscuits again. Want to know how to make them? Let's get right into it by prepping the ingredients. We'll start with 2 medium green onions. Slice and dice them nice and fine like you see here, and then set them aside. These will be dispersed in the flaky layers that we create in the steps ahead, and will add a nice mild onion flavor and additional moisture too. Then get a chunk of cheddar cheese and shred it. You can use the yellow or the white, but what's important is that you use cheddar. And what we have here is a stick of salted butter that's been chilled in the freezer to make it easier to shred. This is an awesome technique for biscuits, and also for making pie crust and certain pastries. They use butter to make them flaky. You'll want to put these back in the refrigerator to keep them cold if you can't go to the next step. Now for the dry ingredients. You'll start with 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, to which you'll add a half a teaspoon of kosher salt. If you're using unsalted butter, increase to 1 teaspoon. And also add 2 tablespoons of baking powder. You could use a sifter to combine this and add some air to the mix, but I don't find that necessary. If I were baking a cake, I'd want to do that. But for biscuits, a whisk will do just fine. Now it's time to introduce the butter, and the best way to do that is with your hands. You want to make sure that each strand of butter is coated with flour and thoroughly dispersed in the dry ingredients. Then all you have to do is form a well in the center and add 1 cup of cold buttermilk. And I want to remind you that it's very important that all the ingredients are cold, because we don't want the butter to stop melting. The melting of the little strips of butter is one of the things that makes them flaky, so keep that in mind. Then you'll want to add about a tablespoon of honey, and then using a spatula, start folding the ingredients together from the outside towards the center. Try not to overwork the dough, because we don't want to develop the gluten in the flour. If your dough seems a bit too dry, try adding a little more buttermilk, about 1 tablespoon at a time. Mine only needed the 1 extra tablespoon. And really, knowing when it's moist enough is something that comes with experience. You just get to know that it's ready. Now preheat your oven to 425 degrees if you haven't done so already. And then prepare a work surface with some flour, because we need to roll out the dough. It helps to put some flour on your hands too, to prevent sticky fingers. And then just bring it all together and knead a few times, but just long enough for the dough to stick together. So now what you'll want to do is roll this out into about a 3/4 inch thick rectangle. Of course, it's not going to be a perfect rectangle on the first go, and that's alright. But this is how we're going to create our layers. Now this recipe originally didn't have cheese and onion. I used the same exact technique to make just good flaky buttermilk biscuits without the cheese and onion. That was an afterthought, and I decided to film it. So anyway, to make these, you'll want to take 1/3 of the cheese and 1/3 of the green onion and spread it out. Of course, on the first one, I kind of made a mistake here. You'll see why in a second. I tried spreading it out evenly over the entire surface area of the first rolling. Of course, that was a mistake, and I realized, oh, wait a minute. Every time I try to fold this over, it's just gonna kind of, just fall off, and unless you press it into the flour. So the first one may not look that great, but you've already created 3 layers of biscuit without even realizing it. Okay, and because we're going to spin that thing 90 degrees so that it's going the long way again, we're going to do this a total of 3 times. A total of 3 times. Okay, and again, 1/3 of the cheese and 1/3 of the onion, folding over, and then again. And what's interesting is that you're going to create 27 layers in doing this. You can do the math as you follow along. Whether you decide on square or round biscuits is entirely up to you. I decided to use a 2.5-inch round cutter for mine. Of course, you'll have to re-roll the remaining dough a couple of times to make more rounds. And then at last, when there's very little left, you can use what's left for the baker's dozen, so to speak. Those are the ones you wouldn't want to serve your guests, but they taste every bit as good. I like to bake my biscuits in a prepared cast iron pan, and because of the size of this recipe I need 2 of my pans to do it. And that's just been lightly greased with a little bit of butter, that's all it takes. And you arrange them so that they're just touching each other. Believe it or not, that makes a difference in the way they rise. And so arrange them and get ready to bake them. But you don't just throw them in the oven just yet. What you want to do next is you want to brush on some of the buttermilk. Some people would use melted butter, but I think buttermilk is nice. It softens the top. It's not that it affects the browning so much. I think that it keeps the top of the biscuit moist while it's baking. Okay, and then you'll bake that for 15 to 20 minutes. And when they come out, they're going to look something like this. Oh yeah, look at that. They're just beautifully, just starting to brown a little bit on the edges. And you can see the baker's dozen over there. They may not look pretty, they taste real good. So anyway, let me just show you how these look on the inside. Just look at those flaky layers with those little tiny layers of onion and cheese. The cheese just melts into it. You don't even see it, but it's there. And with a little bit of butter, these biscuits are like a piece of heaven. Trust me, you're gonna love them. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and join us next week for Shrimp Scampi. And if you don't like shrimp, try out some of our other recipes made for people who like to cook. Until then, bon appetit.